Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Dimitri, you play also. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jai Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Bhajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar to Sri Srimad. His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar to Sri Srimad. His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavini ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Dimitri, just slightly lower. I don't want to wake up Vijay. Okay. So we're in 18th chapter, text 7, I believe, isn't it? Right? Yeah. Okay. Page 666. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the 17th day of November 2021 in San Diego, a reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 18 entitled Conclusion, the Perfection of Renunciation. Text number 7. Niyatasya tu sannyasaha karmano nopapadyate mohat tasya parityagas tamasa parikirtitaha niyatasya tu sannyasa karmano nopapadyate mohat tasya parityagas Tamasak parikirtitaha niyatasya tu sannyasa Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Niyatasyuta sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Go ahead, Boo. Niyatasyuta sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Dimitri. Niyatasya tu sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Ravi. Niyatasya tu sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Want to try? Niyatasyuta sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Want to try? Niyatasya tu sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Ladies? Niyatasya tu sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Niyatasya tu sannyasa. Karmano nopapadyate. Mohattasya parityagas. Tamasak parikirtitaha. Now, Michelle, do you need a book? I think you do. Do we have any other books? No more books. Yeah, we're going to need them anyway eventually. Okay. Yeah, we have, there's so many books. We're made of books. All right, let's go on. Wait a minute, Zoomland.
Niyatasya tu sannyasa.
Niyatasya tu sannyasa.
Karmano nopapadyate.
Karmano nopapadyate.
Mohattasya parityagas.
Mohattasya parityagas.
Tamasa parikirtitaha.
Tamasak parikirtitaha. Anyone else?
Niyatasya tu sannyasa.
Niyatasya tu sannyasa.
Karmano nopapadyate.
Karmano nopapadyate.
Mohattasya parityagas.
Mohattasya parityagas.
Tamasak parikirtitaha.
Tamasak parikirtitaha. Niyatasya prescribed to, but sannyasaha renunciation, karmanaha of activities, na never, upapadyate is deserved. Mohat by illusion, tasya of them, parityagaha renunciation, tamasaha in the mode of ignorance, parikirtitaha is declared. Translation. Prescribed duties should never be renounced. If one gives up his prescribed duties because of illusion, such renunciation is said to be in the mode of ignorance. Purport. Work for material satisfaction must be given up, but activities which promote one to spiritual activity, like cooking for the Supreme Lord and offering the food to the Lord and then accepting the food, are recommended. It is said that a person in the renounced order of life should not cook for himself. Cooking for oneself is prohibited, but cooking for the Supreme Lord is not prohibited. Similarly, a sannyasi may perform a marriage ceremony to help his disciple in the advancement of Krishna consciousness. If one renounces such activities, it is to be understood that he is acting in the mode of darkness. Om Gyana Timurandasya Gyanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, remember that this chapter is entitled The Perfection of Renunciation. And so now we hear just the opposite of the perfection of renunciation. This is the renouncing your duties in the Varnashram society, or especially, as Prabhupada emphasizes, the duties that we may accept in the process of Krishna consciousness, which is ultimately transcendental to Varnashram. But the whole concept of duty is something that we should think about. What is it that constitutes a duty? It's accepting a higher authority, something that you feel you must do for moral reasons, for society, for supporting the family, something that is not necessarily, often is not pleasing to the senses, but you accept it, that this is necessary for your ultimate good, maybe not your immediate pleasure. And if you recall, way back at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna was perplexed about what his duty was. Now, duty and dharma are very close. Dharma is defined in the Srimad Bhagavatam as that activity which engenders devotional service to Krishna, devotion to Krishna. Now, there are also material dharmas, the swadharma that we have, which corresponds to our psychophysical nature. And this can be part of the larger dharma of what we call sanatan dharma, your eternal duty, when it's integrated into Krishna consciousness. Just like Prabhupada would talk about varnashram dharma all the time, the varnas in the ashrams. And ideally, there is there are 4 social orders and 4 spiritual orders, we call ashrams. And society, the ideal society is organized according to that, because everybody fits into one's situation like that. Do we have the door open here? Okay. Is there a cigarette smoke coming in here? Somebody's smoking out there. Or maybe not on our property, I hope. But I smell, do you smell cigarette smoke? Ah, it's strange. Anyway, the big fans aren't running. So that means that it's not sucking in from outside, so I don't know what it is. Anyway, we should turn those fans on, because that'll pull it right out. You know what, the big fans, they're a little noisy, but they're worth it. That way also, any COVID that may be lingering is sucked right out, and we're all safe. Really. That's good, better. Okay, so back to our discussion of duty here. Arjuna was perplexed about his duty. You remember? He says, Karpan nidosho bahata swabhava prichamitam dharma samudacheta. He says, now I am perplexed due to this miserly weakness, and I've lost my actual nature. He says, Dharma says, Karpan nidosho pahata swabhava. His swabhava was to be a warrior. That was his nature, right? And he was a great warrior. And Krishna wanted him to use that skill and that nature for the ultimate good of placing Yudhishthira on the throne, and Dharma would reign in society, real Dharma, right? He was Dharma personified, the son of Dharmaraj, Yamaraj. And so that was all Krishna's plan. Yada yadahi dharmasya glanar bhavati bharata. We all know that verse, right? It should seep in like through the atmosphere. So Krishna says, I come when there are discrepancies in dharma. And that means that things have become confused in society. People have lost their way. They're under the modes of nature, and they're not progressing on the path back to Godhead. Their society is in trouble. So Krishna wants to reinstate that. That's part of the reason why he comes. So Arjuna here, at the beginning, he was perplexed about his duty because it was his attraction for his guru and his grandfather Bhishma Dev and Dronacharya and so many other relatives and friends was interfering with his duty of fighting the war and killing them. You know, he couldn't conceive of it. He was saying, and I always thought the most amazing thing in those first chapters is that he's saying, without the sons of Dhritarashtra, I don't see how we can live. These are the very people who had tried to kill him and his mother in the house of Lac. You remember that? They set it afire. They were ruthless. And yet Arjuna, displaying the real nature of a Vaishnava, he was forgiving, and he said, "Oh, I still, this attraction, I don't want to live without them." So he's perplexed. On the one side, he knows Krishna wants him to fight. On the other side, his heart is telling him, "I can't possibly conceive of killing them." So therefore, he approaches Krishna and surrenders. Please tell me what my duty is, what real dharma is, and how I should act. I'm no longer one-on-one arguing with you because there was an argument going on. Now I surrender to you, and you tell me for sure. Very important point. We have to come to that point also. So here, Krishna is talking about sannyas. Now, sannyas means giving up, right? But here he's saying, if you give up your duties, then that's in the mode of ignorance. That's not going to help you. So how and when and what to give up in the course of your trying to become renounced and detached from material entanglement, that we need guidance for. And here the best guide of all is Krishna. So he's saying prescribed duties. Prescribed duties are those for Varna and Ashram. Now Varna Ashram is perfected when the center is Krishna. Otherwise, if the center isn't there, then it becomes corrupted. And we can see that happen in India, where just being born in the family of a Brahmin, you try to just take the perks of Brahmanhood. But Krishna says very directly in this chapter, guna karma vibhagasha, that the determination of what varna you are and so forth is by your guna and your karma, your actual qualities and how you act, not the birth. The birth can give you a good chance, and genetically you may be in that family, so you have, but that's not the final determining factor. So all of this is coming on. Here he says very distinctly and without doubt that the prescribed duties that we have that are within the Varnashram system, or that are prescribed duties we have in our ISKCON society, if you give them up because you're lazy or you don't want to somehow, then that's a mode of ignorance. And that never leads to something good. That leads to suffering. So that's what he's saying here. That's certainly not the perfection of renunciation, which is what the title here is. Okay, any discussion on this particular verse? Yes, Prabhu. The mic.
So from yesterday class, Krishna tells we should not give up penance and act of charity and sacrifice. Mm-hmm. So how sannyasa order, whoever is in sannyasa order, does charity, bro?
Charity.
Yeah.
Well, in one sense, and this may sound a little weird, but it's true, is that if they're actually acting as proper sannyasis and preaching Krishna consciousness, which is what sannyas was kind of revived in Gaudiya Vaishnava by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, for the very purpose of preaching, traveling and preaching, and being an example, and being as Prabhupada would say, a transparent medium for the Shastra. Shastra's truth. If you're actually doing it right, then you can inspire, So sannyasis generally get charity, and they serve as an inspiration or a perfect object of getting charity. But actually, when you think about it, real Vaishnava sannyasis, they're giving the best charity of all. They're following in the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Mahavadanyaya, right? And the more Mahavadanyaya, Krishna Prema Padayati. Dana and Vadanya. Vadanya means charitable, right? Munificent, Prabhupada, magnanimous sometimes. he's giving the greatest treasure that there can possibly be. Krishna Prema. Prema Pamato Mahan. So that is those who are recipients of that charity and who appreciate it realize that that's a greater gift than you could ever recompense. That's why we say, Srila Prabhupada taught us, that our job as disciples, of a genuine guru, is to try to repay the great gift that's been given to us. You can never repay it. But the only payment they want is you try to give it to others. Right? If you preach, if you try to give it to others, that's the best repayment that Srila Prabhupada was looking for. Nothing material. So really, Krishna consciousness is a matter of giving. There's a verse that comes up that just reminded me. When Krishna's wandering in the forest with his friends after the pastime of stealing the gopis' clothes. So there's kind of a break there, and the chapter goes on. And he's appreciating the trees, how generous the trees are, how tolerant they are, how giving they give their shade, they give their wood, they give the fruits, the flowers. They just give. So then he utters this verse that's quite famous. It says, Etavad janma sapalyam dehi nami dehishu pranar arta diya vacha shreya achananam sada. That etavad, this is kind of a signal word. Etavad, you'll see that through the Bhagavatam, there's maybe a dozen verses that begin with that word. And what it means is, it's kind of a flag. Say, okay, now watch this verse, because it kind of summarizes a very important part of the philosophy. So this is a signal. Here's an important verse worth memorizing or contemplating anyway. So, janma sapalyam, if you want to have a fruitful birth, in other words, as a human being, to really live successfully, here's the formula. So then he said, dehinami hadehishu. It says, a living entity, dehina, should for other living entities, dehishu, prana artha diya vacha, with your life, your force, with your wealth, with your intelligence, and with your words, you should always be doing shreya, good for others. Shreya achananam sada. And he's inspired to say that by the trees, because they're so generous, you can understand them. So you can see the great devotees, they do that. Certainly Prabhupada did that. So much intelligence went into these books. And we should always recall that this is second language for Prabhupada. And he even says in the first canto, he says, I know it's not going to be perfect, But then he quotes a verse. He puts one verse into the preface. Preface is important because the author reveals why he wrote the book. What's the impetus for writing the book? So he quotes this verse right from the 5th chapter, which is one of his favorite chapters for quoting. He said, Tad bhag visargo janataga viplavo yasmin pati shlokam abadnavatyapi namanyanantasya shankitanayak shinvanti gayanti gunanti sarva. So this is Narada Muni speaking to Vyasadeva, inspiring him to write the Bhagavatam. See? So actually the verse before he says, because Vyasadeva had written all these other books. He'd written the Mahabharata, which contains this book, Bhagavad Gita. He'd written all the other Puranas. He'd written down the 4 Vedas, the Vedanta Sutra. You'd think, well, okay, I've done it, but he still wasn't satisfied. He said something's missing. So in his dissatisfaction, his guru comes down. Narada Muni appears, sensing that. And so Narada Muni, as the gurus sometimes do, they chastise. Oh, Prabhu, do you think that the body and the mind are actually proper objects of self-realization? Because he'd written all the Vedas, which a good part of it is karma kanda, and it tells you how to go to heavenly planets and all this other stuff, And so this was the cause of Vyasadev's distress. He hadn't written anything that was wholly and solely and purely bhakti, which is really the ultimate necessity for the living entity. So then he said, Nayad vachas chitta padang hare yasho. He says, you may write something very nice literary, but if it doesn't contain the glories of the Lord and the process of devotional service, then it's like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows, which is pretty heavy words. It's a garbage heap. In other words, it can't really satisfy the real yearnings of the soul. And so, but then he chants this verse, and he says, but even if on the other hand, every verse may be miscomposed, but if it glorifies Krishna and the process and it's sincerely written and presented, then the great souls, they relish it, they hear it, they chant, they accept it. So Prabhupada took that verse and put it in the preface as inspirational, even though I know my writing is not perfect. It was difficult to, write in English, such volumes, still, it's worth doing because it's purely given and the message is there. And sure enough, those books, when Prabhupada, with great effort, he published these 3 hardback books. He had no money of his own, basically. He had to, with great effort, he published one book, used that book to approach other wealthy gentlemen and pious gentlemen. Could you please contribute? 4 or 5 years to print those 3 volumes. But then he had the ammunition. Then he was ready to come to America. Had those potent books. And sure enough, he came and he established, and that was what there was to read, that first canto, which is just fabulous. So they're all fabulous. But there he said he put everything in there because he didn't know what else he would be able to do. And so, the principle of understanding what is real dharma, what is the real necessity of life, and here Krishna gives us with your life force, with your money. Prabhupada needed funds in order to print. So he was approaching this one, that one. Srimati Maharaj to please give me a place in the ship so I can go over. And so he was begging, like a sannyasi is wont to do, but all of it was focused on how can we try, somehow or other, miraculously, try to fulfill the mission of the spiritual master, which has come to the West and spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. And at the age of 69, he finally left India. And nobody could possibly think that this would be successful. So Bhattiraju didn't even want to give him a place on the boat, thinking, Swamiji, you'll just die over there, And so he had to sit in, the whole thing. He sat down in front of her office, and he was chanting. He wouldn't leave, He says, okay. So she's very exalted. She's passed on now. So anyway, Prabhupada is just the opposite of this. He accepted the duty, and the risk of his own life, he tried to fulfill it, and he was successful. And there's so many miracles along the way. Actually, this whole temple is a miracle. No one could possibly have foreseen anything like this in 1964, even in the early days, that it would burgeon and it would be so successful. But Prabhupada had such unbreakable faith in the holy name and in the order of his spiritual master, in the Bhagavatam and the words of Krishna, and he never compromised, and that's why it's successful here. All right, let's go on.
Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol.
I have a question.
I guess you do. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dravida Prabhu. The quote from the purport is, quote, similarly, a sannyasi may perform a marriage ceremony to help his disciple in the advancement of Krishna consciousness, end quote. So, Prabhu, nowadays, the democratic governments around the world are giving permission to marriage between people of the same sex, man with man, woman with woman, also permission for family life, because same-sex marriage with a right for allowing for adoption. So my question is it that Lord Chaitanya's movement sooner or later will adopt the same measures in relation to marriage?
Nope.
Never.
Not that I can foresee. I mean, Prabhupada, when he would talk about marriage, he would always talk about children. Now you said, okay, adoption is there, but the point is that marriage means, it's a license for sexual intercourse under restriction, and for having, Krishna conscious children. And Krishna says, I am that. Dharma varuddha buddhishu kamosmi buddhatarshaba. So that it has to be under the rules of the Dharma. So if you can find that in the Manu Samhita, then we can allow it. As far as I can see, that's not kosher. I say kosher. That's not allowed in Gaudiya Vaishnava circles. And I really don't have much more to say about that. Let me go on, okay?
Of course, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Text 8. Dukam ityeva yat karma kaya klesha bhayatyajit sakrit va rajasam tyagam naibatyaga palam labet. Anyone who gives up prescribed duties as troublesome or out of fear of bodily discomfort is said to have renounced in the mode of passion. Such action never leads to the elevation of renunciation. Purport: one who is in Krishna consciousness should not give up earning money out of fear that he is performing fruitive activities. If by working one can engage his money in Krishna consciousness, or if by rising early in the morning one can advance his transcendental Krishna consciousness, one should not desist out of fear or because such activities are considered troublesome. Such renunciation is in the mode of passion. The result of passionate work is always miserable. If a person renounces work in that spirit, he never gets the result of renunciation. And really, the point is that renunciation in Krishna consciousness is meant to clear our way toward more Krishna consciousness. In other words, the renunciation here is taking just giving something up. In other words, there's always a positive end. You know, in Krishna conscious people take sannyas to free them up for traveling and preaching. Not just that you're retiring so you can laze around or play golf all day. You know, that's not renunciation. That's mode of ignorance. So here the same thing. If it's troublesome, that's part of austerity. Is to accept duties that are proper for your station in life, in the context of Krishna consciousness, that may be troublesome. Now, but the wonderful thing about it is that something that may be troublesome now becomes pleasure as you advance in Krishna consciousness. Coming to Mangalartik, you know, that's certainly an austerity, especially when you first move into the temple, and you know, it's an austerity. You say, well, I'm going to renounce that. I'll perform renunciation. Mode of ignorance. You're not going to get the fruit. You're not going to get the benefit. But if you are serious and you accept it as a duty, then at a certain point it becomes a joy to get up early. You become accustomed to it, and you look forward to seeing the beautiful deities and chanting the song to the spiritual master. The more that your mind is focused on all the elements of that sacrifice, the more that you appreciate it. And it becomes, at a certain point, spontaneously attractive. That's the advancement. And the idea, the prospect of giving it up or renouncing it becomes horrible, you know. So that's another aspect of this renunciation. Again, renunciation in Krishna consciousness always means accepting one thing while renouncing something else. Not just renunciation. Then it becomes in the modes here. So that's not the perfection. All right, let's go on. Probably didn't say much about this. Karyamityeva yat karma niyatam kriyate arjuna sangam chakva padam chaiva satyaga sattviko mataha. O Arjuna, when one performs his prescribed duty only because it ought to be done, and renounces all material association and all attachment to the fruit, his renunciation is said to be in the mode of goodness. Purport: prescribed duties must be performed with this mentality. One should act without attachment for the result. He should be disassociated from the modes of work. A man working in Krishna consciousness in a factory does not associate himself with the work of the factory, nor with the workers of the factory. He simply works for Krishna. And when he gives up the result for Krishna, he is acting transcendentally. Now, this little purport reminds me of a wonderful pastime in the early days of Krishna consciousness. This was before this was in probably the early 70s or even late 60s, when Los Angeles Temple was getting going. San Francisco was going quite well, and LA was starting. And so there was always the question, well, okay, well, how are we going to support the temple? You know, devotees would go out and try to, you know, collect something, you know, give out some back to Godheads, and then they would come back with $10 here and there. You know, it was hard. So Prabhupada said, okay, the leaders and whoever, able-bodied men, you know, I don't know if women were involved in that at this time, should go and get some jobs and make some money, and you know, because in San Francisco, Jayananda was supporting the whole temple by being a taxi driver all day. He's a legendary figure in Krishna consciousness, you know. So Prabhupada said, well, we have to have something like that. In 26 Second Avenue, you had devotees who already had jobs. Satsup Maharaj was a welfare worker, I think, Rupanuga also, and they would give their paychecks and sleep at the temple, you know, this way. They would make ends meet, we'd say. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj, famously, he was one of them, went and they worked. There was some kind of a production line, I forget what it was. But after a few days, they said, this is too deadening. You know, so they said, we're just going to go out and chant Hare Krishna. We're going to go, you know, trust in Lord Chaitanya. So the whole temple went out, and the devotees had back to Godheads, you know, and they were chanting all day, and they were selling back to Godheads, and they found that they, you know, after a few days, devotees were able to collect 12, 20 here, you know, and you had enough devotees, and you're actually able to support yourself that way. And that wasn't the only temple that did that. There were various miraculous stories. What happened in Boston, it happened in Philadelphia. I wasn't there, but I lived in Philadelphia a while, and the leader there, Rabindranath Sarup, to tell this story. The rent was due, you know, and they didn't have the Lakshmi, you know, what to do. Let's go out on Harinam. They went down on downtown Philadelphia. I used to go on Harinam down there, but I wasn't, as I say, I wasn't part of the temple at that point. And everyone was chanting, and for hours. And then Rabindranath Sarup saw a gentleman on the other side of the street, a tall gentleman in, I think, a white suit or a very light suit. You know, he stood out a little bit. Crossed the street, came in front of the party, handed Rabindranath Sarup an envelope, and kept walking into the crowd, gone. He opened the envelope, there was the rent money, and more. Similar thing happened in Boston. There was some place where they went out, and where they went out, and there were $100 bills floating on the sidewalk that they picked up. I swear, in the early days, yeah, miracles like this happened, you know. It's just, wow, you know, Krishna's so wonderful. So somehow or other, the chanting of the holy name enables everything. Prabhupada realized that. He came to America, you know, and here he's in the middle of the hippie thing. So he was able to get, you know, downtown. When he came downtown, things started to happen. I know Manhattan, uptown, is pretty dry. So he was... he had a loft, you know, a loft, which is a big place. They would have artists. This in Manhattan. You know, they had big space, in other words. He was living, he was sharing with some other young man who was a student. And what was he doing? He would have a kirtan. He had one little half of a bongo drum. It's famous. And if you have you see the, you can get onto YouTube. There were these series of following Srila Prabhupada, if you search for that. There's a whole series of DVDs of Yadavar put together, and he has the devotees narrating the story. So the only one that's famous, he's out in Tompkins Square Park. I used to live 2 blocks from Tompkins Square Park in 1968. I wasn't a devotee yet. But you go there, and there's all kinds of people. And he would just sit down, and he started chanting with beating that drum. And he had a few devotees dancing, you know. And before long, there's a big crowd. What's going on here, you know? And everybody's getting purified. A few people with recorders, you know, singing, you know. And among all the people who were there, a few would be interested enough to come back to the temple, more chanting, more hearing, prasadam, and he became the first devotees. Just from the chanting, Prabhupada's energy, sincerely chanting, you know. So we should never neglect that. And So as you progress, the duties you have transform into things that are your life and soul. In other words, it's not like a job. You do it for 30 years. When can I retire? And it becomes such a drudge. But it actually becomes more and more spontaneous, and so it doesn't feel like duty. It feels like play. Anyway, that's the fact. But Krishna is talking about serious things. So if you perform only because it ought to be done, and that recalls right at the beginning of the Gita in the 2nd chapter, Krishna then says, Arjun, you should fight this battle because it's without any attachment to the fruit, simply because it ought to be done, because I'm asking you to do it. Text 10. Nadvesht akushalam karma kushale nanusajjate tyagi sattva samavishto medabi chinna sangshayaha. The intelligent renouncer, situated in the mode of goodness, neither hateful of inauspicious work nor attached to auspicious work, has no doubts about work. Purport. A person in Krishna consciousness or in the mode of goodness does not hate anyone or anything which troubles his body. He does work in the proper place and at the proper time, without fearing the troublesome effects of his duty. Such a person, situated in transcendence, should be understood to be most intelligent and beyond all doubts in his activities. Now this reminds me of what Krishna says at the beginning of the Gita, in the 2nd chapter. 2nd chapter is a summary, and there's verses where Krishna is describing someone who's advanced in Krishna consciousness. He doesn't use directly the words bhakti, but it's clear. And it's very similar to this, where he says, for instance, dukeshvana vignamana, sukeshu vikataspaha, vita raga bhaya krodha stita dhi manuruchite. The stita dhi means one whose consciousness is fixed, and Prabhupada makes it very clear in the purport that is fixed in Krishna consciousness. So just let's contemplate this, because there's several verses that are like this. Dukeshu anudvignamana. Things that means that if there's some trouble to the body and the mind, and there must be in the material world, I got this trouble on my ankle, it just happens, So, but anudvignamana, the mind is not disturbed. This word udvigna, it comes up again and again. You remember Prahlad? I know Prahlad, when his father first questioned him, Prabhupada is always quoting this verse. What did you learn today? He had no idea that he was a devotee. He learned everything in the womb. You know the story. So here he's training him up in the school with Shanda and Amaka, the teachers. And he wants to train up a whole other new generation of demons, So he's his eldest son, So what did you learn? What's the best thing you learned? You're hoping to hear, make an enemy with this one and friends with this one, Machiavellian. No. So he says, Tat sadhamanye asodabhaya sada samudvigna diyama sadgrahad hitvatma patam griyamandakupam vanam gadoyad hadamashriyeta. And those last words hit Hiranyakashipu like a whip would hit, and take shelter of Hari. What? My arch enemy? Because he had killed his brother, right? Hiranyaksha. So he hated Hari. That's the demons, they hate God. So what he says is, the best thing I learned, best of the demons, Prabhupada points out, he doesn't call him father. He calls him Asura Varya, best of the Asuras. Tat sadhu manye. This word sadhu has different meanings. Sadhu can also, of course, be a saint, but it can mean just very good, the best thing. So the best thing I learned, best of the demons, best for whom? Dehinams, for every living entity, who are in this material world, sada samudvigna. Here's that word udvigna. They're always completely disturbed. Why? Asatgrahat. Bhagavatam is so concise, you can learn so much from every word. Because we're holding on for dear life to that which is asat, which is temporary. Isn't that, it's a hopeless enterprise, right? The body. Everyone's very concerned about the health and body, and feed it nicely and protect it and keep it warm. But it's hopeless. The body eventually will fail you. It has to break down like any machine. So that's the source of anxiety, right? And in the course of life, you put your faith in this, you put your faith in that. You know, you put money in the bank, but then inflation goes on, it's worth half what it used to be worth. You know, there's all a million different ways, threefold miseries and everything that way. It's all asat. It's all changing, and it's all, we're taking shelter of a stone boat, in other words. So therefore, there's always sada samudvigna, not just udvigna, but samudvigna means completely in anxiety. So what's the solution? Hitvatma patam, griyamandakupam. He says, give up material household life that's simply centered on matter, material things, sense gratification, which is a blind well. You fall into it and you lose all vision, transcendental vision. So then what do? Okay, I will give that up. Then go to the forest and take shelter of Krishna. Specifically, go to Vrindavan. It's explained in the commentary. So, of course, Hiranyakashipu was not very happy to hear that, but he didn't blame his son. He blamed the teachers. And he looked at Shanda and Marka, and they said, "We didn't teach him. We didn't. How we got this?" So then Shanda and Marka get Prahlad in the classroom and say, "Where do you learn this? Where did you learn this?" They couldn't figure out. Anyway, you know the story. But it's very illuminating verse, because everybody in material life, without Krishna consciousness, is taking shelter of some kind of temporary thing, whether it's something physical, some idea, some ideal. You know, it's all simply a churning ocean of change, of asat. It's not sat. Sat is the eternal. We should be concerned with inquiring into what is the truth. What is that? Janmad yasya yataha. Well, you should, you know, what does it say? Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Brahman, what is real Sat? We should be inquiring into that as human beings. And who are we? Are we also a Sat? Are we simply temporary bubbles in the ocean? And the answer is no. You yourself are Sat. You're eternal. You're eternal. Jayate mete vakadacha. So we're a combination of Sat and Asat. The body and even the mind, all of these things, it's all changing and not eternal. But we ourselves as conscious beings, as Atma, are eternal. And we have to, for our benefit, we want to learn how to live on the eternal spiritual platform. And use this, it's actually you know, the art of bhakti is how to use the asat in the service of the sat. Right? We have our temporary senses and mind, but if we understand, we can use them to contact the eternal Krishna and develop, or let us say revive and discover our real eternal body, the spiritual body and nature. That's the whole point. So those duties should never be given up, the ones that will help us in this. Here he says, the intelligent renouncer, sitting in mode of goodness, neither hateful of inauspicious work nor attached to auspicious work, has no doubts about work. Did we read that one? I forget. Yeah, we just read that. Nadveshti. So this is described, as I mentioned, dukeshtvanu dvignamana. If you're situated in Krishna consciousness, then you'll be able to tolerate all the dualities and the difficulties of this world, because you'll be centered with Krishna, you know. And we saw that with Prabhupada, a perfect example. So many disturbances, you know, in so many difficulties he had to overcome, and disturbances, and then finally his health crisis, and yet he remained fixed. He was with Krishna the whole time, miraculously. And you know, his whole medical situation at the end there was unbelievable, and yet he wasn't disturbed. He wasn't crying. He was, you know, steady. So we can hope for that. Oh, wait, one more. 11. Nahi dehabata shakyam tyaktum karman yasheshataha yastu karma palatyagi natyagit yabidhiyate. It is indeed impossible for an embodied being to give up all activities, but he who renounces the fruits of action is called one who has truly renounced. Purport. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that one can never give up work at any time. Yeah, nahi kaschit chanamapi. Therefore, he who works for Krishna and does not enjoy the fruit of results, who offers everything to Krishna, is actually a renouncer. There are many members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness who work very hard in their office or in the factory or some other place, and whatever they earn, they give to the society. I swear I hadn't read this before. I was just describing how Prabhupada had that at the beginning. He was describing what I just was talking about. Such highly elevated souls are actually sannyasis and are situated in the renounced order of life. It is clearly outlined here how to renounce the fruits of work and for what purpose fruits should be renounced. Now, just one quick note on the history of the movement. This book was written, very early on. And Prabhupada dictated the tapes for this book in probably 68, or late 67, 68. Before there was this explosion of book distribution. But when the Bhagavad Gita came out, especially the unabridged, and there were these other books we had, the Teaching of Lord Chaitanya, a bunch of small books, and of course Back to Guided magazine. And it became clear that when devotees went out, they could sell these books in fairly, efficiently. And Prabhupada said, "This is the real business. No more factory work. This is outmoded." And he actually would see that the movement could be supported on that basis. And then, of course, as time went on, more and more Indian gentlemen came, and ladies and families came and immigrated to America. There was actually a change in the immigration law just before Prabhupada came. Yeah, so make it easier for him to stay. And so gradually we had more settling, and we had a whole congregation. So that became another way to support the temples, which is very important. Not to diminish that, but here he's saying, well, they're working in the factory, but they're giving the. So that was the beginning, but much more preferable would be able to support the movement and at the same time to give out these books. You can see how complete that is. Prabhupada was saying that we should try to completely support the movement that way. You're interesting making devotees, people are getting the books, a certain percentage are reading them and becoming attracted, and the whole thing becomes very transcendental, wonderful. Okay, all right, so it's almost time, so I'll end with a little upbeat poem here, and then we'll resume again on Monday. Okay, here's a maybe some of you may not have heard this. This is a 8-verse poem about the holy name called the Kevalashtaka, which I've been reading lately, and I put it into a poem. It turns out that this is 8 verses of a 100-verse poem that was written by an associate of Bhaktivinoda Thakur named Sri Nilakanta Goswami. I'm going to try to get those other 92 verses. I'm sure they're excellent. But here's the ones he wrote. I'll just give you one sample in Sanskrit, then just do the English. He says, Modaram Modarebhyopi, Mangalebhyopi, Mangalam, Pavanam, Pavanebhyopi, Hare Namayava Kevalam. Of sweet things, it's the sweetest you will taste at any time. Of things that bring good fortune, it's the perfect paradigm. Of things that purify, it purifies most powerfully. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. From Brahma's realm atop the sky, down to the lowly grass, illusion reigns in Maya Devi's treacherous morass. The truth, the only truth, the name of Shri Hari. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. He's the guru, he's the father, he's the friend most true. And she's the real mother who most kindly teaches you to always chant and hear the holy name of Shri Hari. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. Remember that our final breath may come at any time, no matter if we're old and sick or we're in our youthful prime. So young and old alike should chant the name incessantly. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. Lord Shri Hari forever dwells wherever devotees, whose hearts are fixed in him and free of all impurities, uplift their voices high and sing his name in ecstasy. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. Alas, what sorrow, what great pain, the worst calamity, for people to forget the holy name of Shri Hari. Although the name's a priceless gem, mere broken glass they see. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. Just fill your ears, just fill them with the name of Shri Hari. Just chant the name with all sincerity. Just sing the holy name eternally. The holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. It makes this world appear like bits of straw upon the ground. Resplendently it reigns supreme. Divinity and sound is filled with transcendental bliss and peerless purity. the holy name of Shri Hari is surely all that be. Inspired to glorify the holy name of Shri Hari, Sri Nilakanta wrote this hymn in Sanskrit poetry. I pray that those who hear this lowly version made by me will chant the holy name of Shri Hari in ecstasy. Hare Krishna. Anyone who wants my poetry can just write Dravida108 at Gmail and I'll send it to you. Dravida108. All glories to Prabhupada.